Hello there, and welcome to the first in our webinar series on the Global Tailings Review consultation. This meeting will be recorded, and if you would like to ask a question, please do so using the question and answer function. I hope everybody can hear me, but please do let me know via the chat function if you have any problems with the audio. Please note that this webinar is designed to allow you to ask questions rather than to provide the facility to enter into a dialogue. So I hope you appreciate that. So with that, I will hand you over to our chair, Dr. Bruno Oberle.
Yeah. Good afternoon, at least in my region. I am Bruno Oberle. I'm a Swiss citizen, natural scientist and economist, and I have the privilege to be the chair of this process. I will give a short introduction about the origin and the reason of the process. The idea to start a standard, to start a review, to create a standard, was coming up after the tragedy in Brumadinho. Then early this year has caused more than 250 casualties among the employee of the facility there and the people living around. Companies organized in ICMM have realized that the existing guidance, the existing handbook, the existing culture around the sound management of tailings were not enough. We're allowing the very long series of accidents to continue, and decided to start the process to create a standard. A standard is more than a guidance. A standard contains a series of requirements that companies have to comply with if they want to be certified under the standard. This compliance is checked through independent assessors that will report back to the standard, that will take the decision if certified or not. The value of a standard is the value that third parties put in this standard. If third parties, for example, people living around the facility, or regulators, or investors, or insurer, recognize the standard to be a trusted sign that tailings are managed good, safe, they will act consequently and allow the facility to be run. They will allow investments and insurance. This is the ultimate value that motivate companies, that will motivate companies to go for the standard. And because trust is created by engagement, is created by dialogue with others, the company organized in ICMM decided to partner with PRI, Principle for Responsible Investment, and with UNEP, United Nations Environmental Programme, to start the process that have to deliver this standard. The three co-conveners have asked me to chair the process, have allowed me to convey a group of experts to actually writing the standard, experts from various important mining countries with different type of experience and knowledge. They have helped me to convey an advisory board that brings to the process the insight, the wishes, the requests of the different stakeholder groups around the mining and the tailings facilities. They have asked the co-conveners, they have asked me one thing above all, to be quick, to deliver the standard in less than 1 year. And this means that we have started in May. We have drafted the consultation draft of the standard. We are now consulting on the standard, displaying the text to the public, asking for comments, criticism, enrichment, knowledge. We will then, after the closure of the consultation at the end of December, at early next year, incorporate into the text of the standard the feedbacks, having a last endorsement round with the co-conveners, and we hope launch the standard in March 2020. After this launch will come a period of implementation, that it is not object of this project, but of course is already drawing our attention, because we have to write the standard in a way that can be implemented. As a reference, so that you can make an idea what can be the implementation phase. So I refer to the cyanide code. It is also a standard for the mining industry on the management of cyanide, and to the organization around this certification process. This could be an example how the standard on tailings could be managed once it starts having impact. Thank you very much for listening. Roger, back to you.
Okay, so we turn now to one of our expert panel, Ms. Deanna Kemp, who will take us through an overview of the standard. If we can. So Deanna, if you're on the line. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions at any point, please use the question and answer dialog box on the webinar service, and we can ask them as we are going. You don't need to wait until the end to make your question. We're just experiencing some technical difficulties with getting Deanna on the line, but hopefully she will hear us soon. Deanna, are you there? No, my apologies. What we might do instead is to hand over to one of our other experts, who's Andrew Hopkins, who is here with me, and he can talk you through aspects of the standard.
Okay. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sitting here with Bruno in Perth. It's late afternoon. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to first of all make a few comments about the standard as a whole, and then I'm going to lead you through some of the detail. And I'm hoping that Karen and Deanna will be able to lead you through other parts of the detail. First of all, I'm assuming that, I should say first of all who I am. Andrew Hopkins. I'm a sociologist by training. I work at have worked at the Australian National University in Canberra, and I'm very interested in issues of organizational structure and accountability issues for organizations. I will speak more, I may speak more about those things as we go along. I presume you all have a copy of the standard in front of you. So I will be referring to that as we go. First thing I want to draw your attention to is that there is an introduction. It's interesting that many people don't read the introduction, but I think it's really worth looking at it because it will give you a sense of what of the context and what the primary focus of our is. So please read the introduction. Second preliminary comment is this, that there are many words that you may think require definition, and we've tried to do that. Anything you see in italics in the text, you will find a definition of that word or that phrase in the glossary at the end of the document. So we put a lot of work into that glossary. So please consult it if you are in doubt about the meaning of words. It is not perfect by any means. We still have more work to do. So if you identify words that you think need to be defined and they're not in the glossary, please let us know. You can do this by means of accessing our portal and making comments on the standard in that way. We'll say more about that at the end of this webinar. Also in the standard is a consequence classification matrix. We have used the ICOLD, that is the International Commission on Large Dams matrix, which we've adapted to identify or define how serious the consequences of a dam failure would be, and to classify dams in terms of those consequences. There's also an explanation associated with that. So please have a look at that as well. One other point is about, you may think that quite a number of the requirements and topic areas are very broad and possibly beyond scope. For example, the governance requirements appear to be very broad. But when you look at the scoping document, we were given a scoping specification by the three sponsors that Bruno referred to. When you look at that, you'll see that indeed we're invited to look at things like incentive structures in organizations, whether they encourage people to look at risk or whether they encourage people to ignore risk, for example. We're encouraged to look at how we can elevate significant risks to the executive committee level. So these are issues of organizational design and governance, which we do indeed address in the standard. So this is not just a technical standard, it covers a number of things beyond what a normal standard would do. Some things are out of scope. I just draw your attention to the fact that we're not in a position to prohibit or recommend the prohibition of any particular technology, such as upstream dam construction. In parts of the world, people have been telling us that we should have been prohibiting such constructions. We're not in a position to do that. And finally, I would just like to stress that this standard is not in final form. We're not here today to defend the standard, but we're not just in this webinar, but in general in this series of consultations, we're seeking input for the next draft.
So I think we can pass now to Deanna to talk about topics 1 and 2 of the standard.
Okay.
Great. So Audrey, just testing the sound. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, Deanna. Thank you.
Okay, good. Apologies, everyone, for the technical hiccup. So I'm just going to walk you through the first and second topics. So the first topic is the knowledge base. So Audrey, we could advance to, I think, we're going to run through all 6 topics, and I'll talk to this first one. So there are 2 principles under this topic, and they're showing on your screen, so I won't read them out. But the first one is really about developing knowledge, and the second principle is really focusing on then integrating that knowledge. So the key idea here is that a multidisciplinary knowledge base is critical, really critical for having quality input into decisions and emergency preparedness. So we work to create links between the engineering and non-engineering knowledge base, knowing that this is really key for example, for inundation studies and also for the alternatives analysis. So just a little dip into the requirements under that first principle, just to orientate you, is a requirement around developing a social, economic and environmental context, good knowledge in that area, site characterisation, inundation studies, and then stakeholder identification. So that's under the first principle, so doing that work to develop. The second principle is more orientated towards integrating that knowledge into the alternatives analysis, getting an independent party to also look at that analytics, conducting an impact assessment, and also a requirement around updating knowledge if there's a material change. And those last two requirements around financial assurance and financial insurance. So that's topic one. Topic two is called affected communities. There's one principle, one very clear principle under this topic, which is respecting rights, and we're referencing the UN Guiding Principles there as our key document, and also engagement. So there's 4 requirements. The first one is conducting human rights due diligence. The second one around meaningfully engaging people on matters that affect them. The third one is orientated towards minimising the risk of displacement and following international standards in doing so. And the fourth one is establishing a grievance mechanism. So the key idea here, as we see it, is really to offer a step change by positioning communities as very central, very early in the standard, and integrated with other parts of the standard. And across these 2 topics, we do recognise, if you dip into the footnotes, which are very important to kind of read to get your head around all of the detail, is that we do recognise that these studies and processes may well be part of other operational wide studies and mechanisms, but the standard just does require that focus and that depth on the topic of tailings facilities. So that's a quick breeze through topics 1 and 2. Audrey, I'll hand that back to you.
Thanks, Deanna, and we'll head now back to Andrew for topics 3 and 4.
Okay, thank you. So topic 3 is about the technical, one of the most technical sections of the standard: design, construction, operation and monitoring of tailings facilities. It's not my area personally, but so I won't go through this in detail, but I do want to draw your attention to the very first of the principles here, principle 4, which is design, construct, operate and manage the tailing facility on the presumption that the consequence of failure classification is extreme, unless this presumption can be rebutted. Now, this is Diana used the word step change before. There are several step changes in this standard, and this is one of them. It's a very different way of approaching the issue of how to respond to the consequence classification. So I hope, is that on the screen, that principle there? Design, yeah, there it is. Okay, now the first question is, what does it mean to have an extreme consequence classification? Extreme essentially means that if there are people involved a bit below the dam, somewhere in the vicinity of the dam, it could be more than 100 people killed. So there are more than 100 potential fatalities as a result if the dam failed. Now, we're not assuming these dams will fail. It may be that the probability of failure is extremely low, but disregarding that point, if the dam failed, it could kill more than 100 people. So if that is the case, then the consequence classification is extreme. So what does this requirement mean? It means that, by the way, the more serious the consequence, then the tighter and the tougher are the design requirements for the tailings facility. So if the consequence is extreme in that way, it means that the most rigorous design requirements apply. And that's the starting point, that all dams must be built on that assumption, unless we can rebut that presumption. Now, what does it mean to rebut it? It means that if we can find a way to say this is not right, that in fact it's not as severe as this, then we can make a decision that we don't need to design the dam so rigorously. And that decision would be made by a senior figure within the corporation, within the company. It's not just the local risk analysts who would do that, but it would need to be a senior person who is doing that. So the basis for rebuttal is this. First of all, when you look at the situation, there's no way that we can kill 100 people. In fact, there's nobody living within 100 miles, so, for example, or 100 kilometers. And so from that point of view, this tailings facility, the consequences cannot possibly be extreme. That's the first requirement. The second requirement is that, well, maybe over time people might come to live there. So maybe eventually it may have extreme consequences. So the second requirement is he must do reviews regularly to ensure that the consequence classification hasn't changed. And the third requirement is that if the consequence classification does change and we need to design a dam that is much more stringent, much safer, or much tougher criteria, the initial design process must be such that it will allow that much more stringent design process to occur later on. And if those three requirements are satisfied, then the presumption that the dam has extreme consequences can be said to be rebutted, and they can then be built to lower standards. Now that's an example. I'm not going to go through the others, but it puts a lot of emphasis on the organisation having to demonstrate very clearly why it is they feel they don't need to, the dam is not, or the facility is not to be classified as extreme. Now, let me then move on to another one. Let me move on to management and governance now, which is principle 6. Let me talk about a couple of these principles here. Principle 9, let me look at principle 9. Principle 9, elevate decision-making responsibility for tailings facilities with very high or extreme consequence classification. This is another one of these game changers, because what it's saying is that for very serious consequence classification, decisions must be elevated to a very high level in the organization. And in particular, they must be elevated to the board or to a senior management position. And that must happen in two cases: if it is extreme, which means you could kill 100 or more people, or if it's, what else does it say here? Very high, which means killing between 10 and 100 people. So those are the circumstances in which the decisions about whether to build this dam and what kind of safety requirements are necessary, decisions must be made at a much higher than normal level. So this is really a principle about elevating decision-making when consequences are severe. There's quite a well-known principle in large organizations that when risk is high, decision-making should be elevated. But we are going beyond that to the concept that where the consequences are severe, no matter how low the likelihood, decisions about these matters must be elevated. So a couple of other points in terms of accountability and of top executives. The standard requires that there be someone called an accountable executive appointed. That person must be a senior manager at a very senior level in the organization, who will be accountable, personally accountable, for the safety of these operations. That is another one of these step changes, because that doesn't exist in many organizations at the moment. In addition, there will be a site-specific responsible tailings facility engineer, someone working at the site level, an engineer that is a qualified engineer. And one of the interesting requests or demands within this standard is that that responsible tailings facility engineer is accountable up an independent line to the accountable executive. Normally these engineers are accountable to line management, that is to mine management, but the standard requires that they are directly accountable up an independent line to the accountable executive. Of course, they'll be providing services to the mine manager, but it's ultimately the accountable executive who will determine their future. One other point that we are stressing is that if there are bonus systems in operation, that for people who have a role in the tailings management system and who are eligible for bonuses, companies should consider providing a component of that bonus linked to tailings facility integrity. I think I might stop at that point and hand over to Karen.
Thanks, Andrew. We hand now to Karen Nash, who will review topics 5 and 6. Karen?
Okay, hi there. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, perfect.
Great, okay. Short introduction. I am a specialist in environmental social performance, and I've been working in and around the extractive sector for about 30 years. So I'm going to talk you through topic 5 and topic 6 of the standard. I think it's worth saying that topic 5 aligns in the with the focus on improvement of safety of tailings facilities, which is the focus of the whole standard. Topic 5 aligns with the objectives that we were given to improve emergency planning and preparedness. It covers emergency preparedness and response in the event of a tailings facility failure, then that's the focus. It's encouraging operators to avoid complacency and even to anticipate demands that would be placed on them and on public sector agencies with whom they have to work in the event of a catastrophic failure. We require that operators should consider both their own capacity and that of other parties, and that they plan ahead. They build that capacity where necessary, and that they work collaboratively with other parties to prepare for the unlikely event of a failure. The requirements also outline the fundamental obligations of the operator to support re-establishment of the affected area, which includes re-establishing ecosystems and looking at long-term recovery of affected communities. And this is one of the areas, actually, interestingly, where we have a common theme that threads through a number of the topics and the principles and the requirements, and that is the engagement with affected communities. So just with a nod back to topic 2, while topic 2 actually only, one could say, has one principle, the principle of meaningful engagement threads through a number of the other requirements. So just looking at topic 5, then principle 15 has 4 requirements. The first being to prepare the response plan based on failure scenarios and assessment of potential consequences. And that is mandating the use of the knowledge base. And again, flipping back to topic 1, the knowledge base, the requirements for the knowledge base are that that be regularly updated, and therefore, in preparing emergency response planning, there is a requirement to consistently review and update the plan in line with any changes in the knowledge base. And that includes the closure scenarios. We also have requirements for meaningful engagement, which is a term that is clearly defined in the glossary. Engagement of employees and employee representatives, site contractors, public sector agencies, first responders, and communities in that emergency planning and implementation, and a focus on specific at-risk communities as well. Then we have the requirement to assess capacity and capability, and an obligation on the operator effectively to fill the gaps to some extent. The footnote mandates that specifies that where gaps remain in capacity of agencies to provide emergency response services, the operator will provide those services. Requirement 15.4 talks about training and testing. So with all the affected stakeholders. Then we have principle 16, which is preparation for long-term recovery. Again, meaningful engagement in social and environmental response. Assessment of disaster impact. So we're bringing in disaster impact assessment, nature and extent of damages and losses. Working with public sector agencies to facilitate reconstruction and recovery planning. again, to focus on addressing medium and long term, not just the immediate response. Facilitating participation of affected people in those restoration, recovery, and in ongoing monitoring. And then the final requirement for this topic is talking about monitoring and reporting of the outcomes of those plans to ensure effectively that they are aligned with the thresholds and indicators that were planned originally, and to adapt the activities in response to those findings. Okay, so it's an adaptive management and adaptive response that we're looking for there. Okay, so then topic 6, we can move on the slide. Again, linking to the original objective we were given here to enhance public disclosure. This topic can, to some extent, be read in conjunction with the affected communities topic again. And we are mandating that the operator should provide public access to information on tailings facility decisions, on risks and on impacts, on management plans and on mitigation plans, and in performance monitoring. So, and there's also a commitment here to require operators, that operators commit to transparency and participate in global initiatives that are creating standardized, independent and industry-wide and publicly accessible databases and information about tailings facilities. And this particular requirement reflects the convener's commitment to push for increased public accountability. So I think there are 3 requirements there, and I've covered pretty much all of them. I think what's worth highlighting is the way that the public disclosure and access to information requirement, particularly requirement, which one is it, 17.1, refers to a number of other requirements, again, throughout the standard, for which we would require public disclosure and access to that information, with a few caveats, which are given in note 37. Applicable law and confidentiality of business information being a couple of those. But yeah, so I think that's probably covered effectively the 6th topic. Audrey, handing back to you.
Thanks, Karen, for that. As yet, we haven't received any questions, so I would encourage you to please use the question and answer box to ask any questions you might have, either on the content of the standard or on the process or on the review itself. In the absence of questions, I will hand back to Bruno, who will talk about the closing of the consultation period and encourage you to participate. Bruno.
Yes, but first of all, thank you for having taken the time to listen to this webinar. I encourage you to engage in the consultation in written. You can go to the homepage that the address is displayed in the left corner, globaltailingsreview.org, and you will find there the platform, the portal, where you can let your comments, suggestions, and criticism. You see on the screen how this portal is looking. You can engage in several languages, and you can engage in several formats. Your contribution would be highly appreciated. The consultation is open till the end of December of this year, so please go there and make us this Christmas present. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So final call for any questions or any final comments, indeed, from any of our panelists. With that, I will close the call. Thank you for attending, and we hope you found this valuable. Thanks all.
Thank you.